And we have Rob in here, so I will hop him in. And this one's going to be live, so everyone check it out.
This is the one that's not going to be the only one that's not going to be still available. So if you go anywhere, you chose poorly.
Hello.
Hello.
How y'all doing?
Good. How are
Good, how are
you?
you?
I'm good. Oh man, there's been a lot of great panels today. Holy crap, this has been awesome. I've been tuning in as often as I could, and it's a lot of great stuff going on here.
So many wonderful people agree to
Mhm.
this. I'm like I'm filled with this reservoir of endless joy and delight, like that people have come
Yeah.
out and
You
supported. And
you are one of them, though, Rob. We're actually incredibly lucky that everybody who agreed to do this agreed to do this. That's how
mhm,
I feel. Like, just
yeah,
wow.
totally.
It was an incredible honor to be asked because I've never been asked to do anything like this before. So I appreciate it. Thank you
Of
so
course.
much for asking me to do this because this and what I'm talking about today actually ties into a lot of the research that I had been doing to begin with, and it was something that I definitely wanted to bring to the people, and I think this is kind of the perfect arena to do it because with Our Strange Skies, I only have so much time, and with the 2 hour block here, you're going to get a lot of interesting UFO cases from Africa, which in many ways is a country that is often overlooked for its UFO activity, and there's a few different reasons for that I'll get into here shortly. For those that don't know me, those that are seeing me for the first time, hi, I am Rob. Host of this podcast, which is a podcast that deals exclusively with UFOs, UFO stories. We generally cover a singular topic, a singular story per episode. I've been a UFO researcher for the last 6 years. And I've had a myriad of UFO sightings in my own life. The subject that we're talking about today is UFO cases from Africa. And this kind of relates to something that you are all familiar with that happened back in June when UFO Twitter was on its full sexist bullshit display, and it was, called out as often as it could. And it really exposed how marginalized voices are not addressed within the UFO community. And if you look at the image of UFOs within that community right now, it is a very Amerocentric. It is focused on military encounters, which, while they are fascinating, excludes so many different experiences and voices out there that it gives you an incredibly narrow view of a really fascinating subject, given that these things range from just a simple light in the sky to, hey, this weird alien brought me on board their UFO and they like showed me around and stuff. There's a vast range that gets left out that just infuriates me about this subject because a lot of people don't see UFOs past 2004, and it is frustrating. So that got me thinking about a lot of the marginalized voices in this community because you see it with women whose stories don't often get featured, and in terms of their research in the community often gets downplayed or it doesn't receive the boost that it deserves. You see that from LGBTQIA plus people, and to be honest, there's only one story that I've ever covered that features there were a group of lesbian and bisexual women who, because they all knew this one particular woman, they were having these abduction experiences. Some of them were because of the relationships that they were in with her. Some of them were friends with her, and there was this very strange connection with this woman that led them to have these abduction experiences. A lot of them were one off, but it was just a fascinating case that nobody talked about. Like, why is nobody talking about this? And that's not to say that the folks investigating this didn't have problematic views, because one of the investigators, a guy named D. Scott Rogo, had very troubling things to say about this case up front, in saying that he thought that these abduction experiences were essentially rape fantasies. And I'm like, what are you? No, what the hell are you talking about? That is garbage, dude. And the main investigator on this case was a woman named Ann Druffel, and I loved Ann Druffel because she wrote one of the best books in the 90s called How to Defend Yourself Against Alien Abduction. And like, it was this case that kind of sent her down the path of, okay, well, how do we, is there a way to combat these abductions? Because there was one woman, her name was, her pseudonym was Lori Briggs. And she talked about how when she was a teenager, she would fight off these aliens by basically humming in her head. And they're like, oh, they create a sound, so I created a louder sound. And they just kind of left me alone after that. But the explanations and the reasoning behind these cases that they arrived at were just ridiculous. So you had D. Scott Rogo's interpretation, which is just, again, just terrible. But you had Ann Druffel, who couldn't look at anything beyond a Christian view of things, because that was her lens with which she like looked through everything. And you could go buy this book. This book has been republished under the Anomalist imprint, and like, there's troubling things even about Neanderthals in there. Like, she's like, oh, Neanderthals are just knuckle scraping cave people, and we're finding out now that they may have actually created art. So no, they're a little more nuanced than you give them credit for. And the biggest voices that I saw being marginalized here were people of color. In like, so much so that I don't think there are very many people that could name an African American that had a UFO encounter. There's really only one in my mind that comes to it, and it's a man named Harrison Bailey. This is another case that was investigated in the 1970s, and Harrison Bailey, he was a minister in the Chicago area, I believe, and he talked about having these abduction-like experiences, but he also claimed to take pictures of aliens. Never seen them. Don't know if they actually truly exist, but it is another Ann Druffel case that was absolutely fascinating. But to take it a step further, I've always been kind of fascinated with Africa, because one of the most fascinating UFO cases comes from Africa, the Ariel school landing, which is, it's not a case I'm going to be talking about tonight just because it's been talked about so many times over and over again since 1994. And if you could pick one case to represent kind of the UFO culture of Africa, it's kind of a perfect cross section, because it occurred in Rua, Zimbabwe in 1994, and it kind of gets into the fact that in the areas of Southern Africa, it's kind of a melting pot. You have your folks that are of Black African ancestry. You have folks, because a lot of these countries were colonies, there's a lot of white folks that live there, but there's also a lot of Asian folks that live there, and it's more of a melting pot than I initially believed. So the breakdown of the folks that of the children that had experiences during the aerial school landing, there were your folks of Black African ancestry, your white folks, your mixed race folks, and there were actually Asian kids there that I didn't even realize. But breaking it down, the concept of the UFO in Africa at that time was relatively new. It had started to emerge in the late 1980s with the way that UFOs started to come into popular culture a little bit more. So in 1987, there were two books that were monumental within the UFO world. One of them was a book called Intruders by Bud Hopkins, and it detailed Debbie Cobble's experiences in her abduction experiences. And the other one is Communion by Whitley Strieber. The image on that book kind of it seemed to like unlock a lot of different experiences for a lot of different people, because up until that point, abduction seemed like something that, you know, a few people experienced here and there. The beings that they encountered were very different. Sometimes they were human looking, sometimes they had mushroom shaped heads and very weird eyes, and sometimes they were very human looking. And after that incident, it was kind of like I had experiences with this back in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. And I would be remiss to say that Whitley Strieber, especially these days, is a pretty problematic dude, especially his comments following the murder of George Floyd. For anybody who doesn't know, Whitley Strieber basically thinks that it was a false flag operation. So, you know, screw you, Whitley Strieber. But that book in particular kind of put UFOs more into the mainstream. You saw experiencers appearing on shows like Oprah Winfrey. I remember watching like alien abductees with my mom when I was a kid on those shows and stuff like that. And the other big thing was unsolved mysteries. Just given the network that it was on, it gave exposure to UFO cases, to you know, spirit hauntings and things like that. And one of the big cases that it featured was the Roswell incident, and it was because of Unsolved Mysteries that the Roswell incident kind of became a household name. And it was around this time that UFOs really started to be identified as UFOs in Africa, which is interesting because they have not the richest history, but there is a history there nonetheless that is worth talking about. So for a long time, there was just no exposure to the idea of UFOs in Africa. There were UFO cases, but they often weren't interpreted as UFOs, especially folks of Black African ancestry. The main thing that they would interpret them as is ancestral spirits, which is kind of not unheard of in the United States when you think of terms like ghost lights and like the Marfa lights and even the Hesselin lights in Norway. When you look at those, a lot of the times they are related to spirit activity or believed spirit activity. People who have been, you know, murdered by the tracks or something like that, or people killed in mines. For the native African people, they are more ancestral than anything. And I've kind of broken this down into 4 different categories of cases that I'm going to bring to y'all. And the first kind is what I like to call they're like orb cases, orbs, or what I call them blobs of light, because they seem like something more than orbs, and they often do things that are they interact with their environment in very strange ways. So the first case that I want to bring to everybody's attention is the Rosmead light. So Rosmead is in South Africa, and in November of 1972, there was a primary school that was run by this guy named Harold Truder, and he was coming back from a weekend away. And he actually lived right next to the school. Actually, I think he lived on school grounds itself. But as he's coming into his driveway over by the tennis courts, which had just recently been installed, he sees this light in the sky that's shooting a beam down right at these tennis courts. And he draws his wife's attention to this light, and it's there for a short period of time. It disappears. he goes over and investigates, and he sees that what has happened is that whatever this light was, it caused these perforations in the tarmac of this tennis court, and it actually looked like there was a weight put to it, because where this light shot down this beam, there was an indentation in the ground, and there was also small pieces of the tarmac embedded into this guy's garage. And this guy's garage was 200 meters or 650 feet away from the tennis courts, which is fascinating for something that you witness for just a short period of time. So there's actually additional eyewitnesses that came forward. They worked at a nearby military camp. One of them was a rifleman named S.J. Rousseau, and he had actually taken his mattress outside with 3 other guys, because it had been about 100 degrees that day, and they were trying to just get fresh air. And at about 8:15 that night, it was primarily him, but he did point to this light to his other buddies. They didn't seem to care, but he saw what he assumed to be like the taillights of a car, because it was red in color. But he noticed that there were no like accompanying white headlights or anything like that, and these lights kind of just seemed to hover about 5 feet off the ground. So despite the fact that we have multiple eyewitnesses in this case, the police just determined, well, there was some vandalism here. And I'm just thinking to myself, how do you crush some tarmac like without having some like heavy machinery, and like the interesting thing here is that the tarmac had the appearance that it had melted a little bit. So you've got some crazy people out here with some intense heat and stuff like that, ruining this tarmac. But the main investigator in this case is a woman named Cynthia Hind, and Cynthia Hind investigated UFOs in Africa for about 20 years, and she is the one person responsible for the body of work that I was able to draw from. And she had an interesting theory in that this UFO basically got itself stuck in the tarmac, and it had to like force itself out, and that's why it appeared melted, and that's why Harold Truder had small pieces of tar in the back of his garage. So you have these. This is a first example of these very strange orbs of light. Another case comes from it's a place called Chinhoy, Zimbabwe, and there's a farmer there named Taki Maurice, who had a dairy farm that overlooked this hill that dipped into a beautiful valley. This is September 1983, and Taki is walking out of his farmhouse to get an early start at the day. It's about 3:30 in the morning. The dairy trucks have started to arrive, and they're starting to be loaded by his workers. And that's when he notices in the valley there's this it's an orb of light, an orange orb of light that just kind of like traces its way up and down the valley. He doesn't think anything of it at first because it just kind of disappears and he doesn't see it again. But on multiple separate occasions, he goes outside and he sees this light, in the morning. And at one point, again, it's another early morning. He's going to he sees the trucks being loaded. He goes over to his staff and he's like, "Hey, do you see this light over here?" And they're like, "Yeah, we see it all the time. It's we think it's a good spirit because it doesn't bother us." So Tucky, underneath his breath, says, "Well, I wish it would come closer." And of course he gets his wish. So it's about 3:30 They're loading the truck, and all of a sudden one of his workers just like steps back. This light had come within about 70 meters or about 200 feet away, and it was just coming closer. Everybody was so scared at that point that they all piled into this milk truck, because in many ways these orbs of light generate a fear response in a lot of the native folks of Africa. So Taki got his wish, and after that, he didn't think anything of these orbs. He just let them do what they wanted. There are incidents in which there are negative connotations to them. There is a case of a man whose name was Maganga, and he was walking home. He was taking this path home, and this white orb of light appeared in his path, and he was initially terrified. So he started to turn around and go back the way that he came. Only the orb would appear every time he turned around. And eventually this orb went out, and after that he started to feel this like a pair of hands choking him. This feeling, it dropped him to his knees until, it eventually subsided. It took him some time to actually collect himself and get back home. And he would go on to report that after this experience, he had trouble moving his limbs, he couldn't talk, and that eventually the family, his family, called in a medicine man that had to come in, brought forth an herbal remedy, and he ended up like vomiting this green substance. And after that, he kind of returned to normal. So again, this the further interaction with these strange orbs. The most important case in all of this, and one that I've talked about on social media before, and especially after the UFO Twitter sexism crap, is a case called the La Rochelle incident. And I think the La Rochelle incident is a good example of how these things can be interpreted differently, these kind of UFO sightings. So on the northeast border of Zimbabwe, nestled in the Mbiza Valley, there is this beautiful sprawling estate known as La Rochelle. And, when you first walk upon it, in the descriptions, the first thing you see is this incredibly tall watchtower. It just kind of looks down upon anybody that comes on the property. And on their website, which you can still visit La Rochelle today, you can actually book weddings, you can book conferences, you can book whatever you want. This is how they describe the La Rochelle estate. Quote, a magical cross twixt fairy tale castle and French chateau, surrounded by manicured gardens on the edge of a verdant forest cloaked mountains. This luxury house is an oasis of tranquility and charm. And like, I think that's all I've ever wanted in life. Give me that tranquility and charm. I am here for it. Just go to town. So the way that this property is built is just kind of very strange, and it gets into a lot of very different types of architecture. There is a building that is known as the Fantasy Building, which for the original builders of the house, the family named the Courtaulds, Stephen and Virginia, the Fantasy Building was often seen as kind of like a greenery in a way. So Lady Virginia, she often housed her orchids in there, and it's actually a very beautiful part of this entire sprawling estate. And what's interesting is that it's actually managed by their forest training school. So they have different things that they actually teach out there, kind of like certain like basket making techniques. There are people that will teach you that there, and a bunch of different things. But in August of 1981, the area was maintained by about 30 laborers, and they had 3 game park wardens that managed this. And at around 6 p.m. on Saturday, the 15th of August, a woman by the name of Eunice Kochti, she was home. A lot of the residents, the people that worked there, actually lived on the estate. She was in charge of the home crafts workshop where she would teach, basket weaving and stuff like that. She was looking out her window at this cassia tree that she had this beautiful view of, and she could see the strange ball of fire up in this tree. And then she noticed that below it there were these 2 strange men, and they had these like elongated flashlights in their hands, and they're looking up at this like very brilliant light. And the only feature that she could discern aside from the flashlights is that they were all wearing a pair of jeans. Now, she didn't exactly relate these to like the staff on hand. They kind of looked distinct. So before long, this ball just started to roll out of this tree, and it headed for an area called the tea room, where the Courtauds would take tea. And its color, which was initially like a yellow, it started to change into this very menacing red color, and it started to just grow in size as it rolled along. And it eventually reached the diameter of about 5 feet. And this ball moved behind this tree, rolled towards this tea room, and it kind of just like went back and forth a couple times until it came to the observation tower. So this observation tower was huge, and this ball just started to roll up into this. And at the time, there was another witness named Nason Sampindi, who was the Courtaulds' actual former gardener. So working for the forestry service, he was actually walking out of the apostolic church that they had on the grounds, and he sees this ball enter this tower at the top. And from his vantage point, it looks like it's on fire. But the thing is like there's no flames jutting out. It's just the color of what would look like flames. It's this reddish orange, and it seems to be radiating out from all angles. So the ball remains in there, and they can kind of see it rolling around a little bit. And it was at this point that the ball started to roll down the hill, or down the tower. And one of the main witnesses to this case, a guy named Clifford Muchena, he sees this ball, at first in the tea room, and he witnesses it going up into the watchtower. This was around 6:30 by that time. And like nearly everyone's alerted to this thing. Clifford sprang into action because he thought it was a fire. Like whatever this was, it was catching everything on fire. So he's headed for this building called the Fantasy Building, where they would house all these orchids and stuff. And he's going to go ring the emergency bell to get the attention of his boss, a guy named Andrew Connolly. So as he's running, he's noticing, because the ball isn't too far away from him, that it's not leaving any scorch marks of any kind. There's no burns left by whatever this thing is, but it looks like fire. And inside, Clifford, he would later remark how it looked like there were flames on the inside of this thing dancing around. So he goes and he rings this bell, and he keeps following this ball until right near the Fantasy Building, he sees 3 men that are just standing with his back to him. And at first, he thinks that one of these men is his boss, Andrew Connolly. So he calls out to him. And that's when these men turn around. And the way that he describes them is that they're wearing these whitish overalls, but he can't see their faces because there's an intense bright light that is coming from their faces. And it's just so incredibly luminous that it forces him to drop to his knees, and it blinded him. At a certain point, he actually just fell forward to put his hands up over his eyes in the hopes that whatever was happening would stop. And eventually, when he does sit back up, he notices that they're gone. The ball is gone. These men are gone. And the event is over. When Cynthia Hine went to investigate this case, she was there, I want to say like maybe a month or two after it had happened. She was, it had interviewed a lot of these people. And the one thing that I like about Cynthia is that she's not one of these people who believes that you interview these people once and that's it. She would, maintain contact with many of these witnesses over the years. But she talked to Clifford about what he thought this was. And he was in the camp with many of the witnesses that had seen it, that it was an ancestral spirit of some kind. And when Cynthia asked him, well, that's not what your ancestral spirits would look like. They would look like this. Clifford had the best response. He said, yes, but times change. Like, this man was willing to accept that, hey, these things change over time. So it could definitely be a spirit, but hey, these things could definitely just change over time. And I love that about this case, is that a man in his beliefs is willing to accept that they can change form over time to fit in with a more modern age. And one type of ancestral spirit that they believed this entity to be was called a shave. And a shave is essentially, because of a tribe called the Mashona tribe, they believed that there were certain spirits that would come back to haunt their ancestors if they had not done them right, or had fulfilled their duty for them before they departed. So what I find interesting about this case is that there's a similar case in Aveyron, France in 1966. And I don't have I didn't have time to prepare any slides, but on this farm in Aveyron, France, this unnamed family, they ended up seeing these balls of light on their property, and they too described them like fire. They looked like they were burning on the inside, and they would see them on their farm over a period of months. And they would see this thing called a shell, which looked a lot like a missile silo in a way, or like a grain silo. But this is essentially, I love this image because this is the patriarch of the family there, and this ball of light would actually follow him around wherever he would go. Most of the time they remained in their home. They didn't want to go out and deal with this, and they had a very passive attitude. Like the grandmother of this family was the first to see this object. And the funny thing is like, she believed that it was a fire, but somebody else was going to get it. She was going to bed. So you have a very interesting parallel to the La Rochelle incident in this case, and I just love it so much. It's eventually a case that I will cover on Our Strange Skies somewhere down the road. So moving from the orb cases, I only have a few close encounter of the first kind cases and CE2 cases that I'm going to present. And the only CE1 case I have here is from a guy named Joe Seeley, who lived in Cape Town. South Africa. He was driving to Monte Vista to pick up a maid, actually, that was coming to live and work on his property. And this sighting was in early December 1980. It was between 3:30 and 4 p.m. that he was driving on this highway, and at first he sees what he describes as a glint in the sky out the window. Something that is the sun is shining off of. And eventually he notices this thing that is making an arc in the sky. And the woman that he had with him, who was of Black African ancestry, also saw it too. So eventually he pulls over on the side of the road to get a better look at this thing. And it, for lack of a better term, as it comes closer, it looks like a rocket. But the thing is that it has identifying marks on it. He claims that he sees a United States flag on it and the words USA written in bright letters. But the thing about this sighting is that this rocket is making very little sound. And in fact, the entire time this sighting was taking place, he claimed that he couldn't really hear anything. And eventually this rocket would come down nose first at an angle, and then it would kind of, turn parallel to the road. And he was like hundreds of meters away from this thing, but it was apparently shooting out so much flame. The flame behind this object was twice the size of the actual object itself. And I actually have an image here of what it looked like. So it's a very poor display, but like he claimed that there were identifying marks. He couldn't remember all of them, but just like so much flame shooting out the back of this. There's like no sound coming from this thing, and eventually it kind of does a couple of passes on the road until it just shoots up into the air. And the description of this thing, the way that he talks about it, I want to quote Joe here. Quote, when it was almost horizontal to the ground, I had a very clear look at this for a long time. I was surprised that it was so short and very thick in diameter. It was dumpy. The nose was not a long pointed nose. It was more cone shaped. But like, dude, the audacity to say that the UFO that you're seeing is dumpy, I think is bold. That's a bold move right there. It's getting into the Guillermo del Toro area where he was like trash talking the UFO that he had seen. It's just so great. So great. Moving on from this case, there's another CE1 case that occurred on September 16th, 1965, and it was seen in Pretoria, South Africa, by two constables, a guy named John Lockham and another guy named Koos de Klerk. They were kind of patrolling late at night, and their headlights fell on a disc-shaped object. It kind of almost looked like a large floppy hat in a way. It was copper-colored, 30 feet in diameter, and it kind of had just like a luminous glow about it. They saw it for about 10 seconds before it just kind of lifted off in the middle of the road, and there were these gouts of flame shooting out from behind it. But that's just like another interesting case. And like with these cases and the way that I'm presenting them, it's kind of trying to give you like a spice of life of these cases, in that what you're getting is a lot of cases from the perspective of white people, and what you're getting is a lot of perspectives from those of African ancestry. And it's kind of a mixed bag here, in that from a cultural standpoint, you have primarily two different cultures coming at this from a very different perspective. In that, the native Africans see this as something that is very tied to their tribes and tied to the old ways of life, whereas the white folks of today see it more as kind of technological in a way. And it's interesting to see how those two cultures kind of treat each other in those spheres. So there is a precursor kind of incident that took place in the week leading up to the La Rochelle incident. And it's kind of hard to call it a UFO incident specifically, but in Mutar, which is about 9 kilometers or about 5.5 miles away, there was a gentleman by the name of Jacob Nieuwergelt. He worked and managed a sawmill in the town. And at about 10 a.m. on this particular day, he wasn't exactly sure on the day, but the main investigator, Cynthia Hine, said it was in that week leading up to the La Rochelle incident. A number of the personnel there saw this bright white flash in the sky. It was very instantaneous. It lasted about a second. There was no sound, but it looked similar to kind of like an explosion in the sky. And moments after this happened, the radial arm saw just stopped working. So they presume that it overheated. They end up taking the motor apart, and they realized that it was fine. It wasn't even, all that hot to the touch. So they broke down the motor more, and they found that the solder that was that held the armature together had melted. Apropos of nothing, like what the heck? So this caused the motor to just stop working, and is something that they could not explain. It's something that happened that is I'm kind of lost for words on that one. How does something like that happen? But there was no overheating of any kind. So just an interesting incident that occurred in the weeks leading up. And there are cases in Southern Africa, and a lot, and when I talk about and a lot of the UFO history that you have coming from Africa, all of them are Southern African countries. So you're talking about South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana. These are the areas where a lot of these UFO cases are coming from. So there are cases in which UFOs seem to be interested in water, which is something that is commonly reported within the United States, is that there seems to be some kind of connection between UFOs and water. If you're familiar with the Albert Bender story, and if you're familiar with his story, he talks about how when he had his initial Men in Black experience, they appeared in his room, that these aliens, which looked like the Flatwoods Monster, that's what he claimed they looked like, they took him on a ship to Antarctica, where they were apparently gathering water that they needed for a fuel source. So that type of thinking has been in the UFO community kind of for a long time, regardless of whether you believe Albert Bender's story or not. It's definitely out there, but it's still fascinating nonetheless. But so there was this woman. She was given the moniker PL. She lived in Komechi in South Africa. And in November of 1991, she was having trouble sleeping because her damn pool pump kept going off. I mean, this is something I've talked about in the there's a series of incidents in Florida in Gulf Breeze in the late 1980s by a guy named Ed Walters, who his story is definitely very fantastical. It was one of the first stories that started to emerge following the abduction phenomenon. And he talked about how he just kept having trouble with his pool pump. And like, you kind of want to plead to these aliens, hey, come on down and just like fix this damn pool pump or something, you know, like help a guy out. So this woman was having trouble with her pool pump. And as she's going outside, she sees this blue flickering flame, and it wasn't very big. It was about like a foot high, and it was this intense, like really blue color. And she couldn't really make out any flames, but it was just the blue light, and it seemed to be coming from the base surrounding her pool pump. And she observed this for about 15 seconds before the flame just vanished. And strangely, before she returned to bed, she actually looked outside and she saw this similar blue flame in her neighbor's window. Didn't know what it was, and it disappeared. So the next morning, her husband goes out and notices that the pool, the water level is much lower than it was the day before. In fact, it was actually missing about 528 gallons. I don't know how that happens, but apparently this is blue light is just desperate for water. And there's a much earlier case that is equally fascinating that happened in 1979. This couple, Ron and Heather Moses, they had a 52,000 liter tank, which is about 13,000 gallons of water on their property. And when they had checked it, this was on like a Saturday night, they saw that it was, just completely full. There was about 2 inches of water from the top. And then the next day they go outside and the tank was bone dry. They didn't have any explanation for it because there was no leak that they could find. There were no tracks leading to their tank, making it seem like somebody had poached the water. But they did have a bunch of UFO sightings in the area that kind of corresponded to this incident. So in the end, they chalked it up to this UFO stealing their water. And I'm just gonna say it's kind of a dick move. It's kind of a dick move, UFOs. Let's take it easy. We need the water too. I think it's kind of cruel to just rob it from these people. But I understand. UFOs got a UFO. So now we're going to move into the CE3 cases. CE3 cases are absolutely fascinating. They are kind of the bread and butter of what I like to do at Our Strange Skies, just in that, aliens or strange beings, they always make a case that much more fascinating. And I've broken this down into 3 categories on its own. So you've got your traditional contactees in the sense of the 1950s contactees in the United States. Africa did have a couple of them, which I will touch upon briefly here. The traditional CE3 cases, because who doesn't love those, in which alien beings are seen in association with UFOs. And the final one is abductions, because there are a few abduction cases that do come from Africa. So part of the reason that UFOs started to catch on in Africa is because of one, Cynthia Hind, she actually started to give more and more radio interviews in the 80s. But there was another woman who had come forward in the 1950s claiming UFO contact uh, in the way of like a George Adamski or a Truman Bethram, people from like different planets. They looked very human-like. They more often than not had blonde hair. And like the contactees are like the much more peaceful kind of way of approaching things as opposed to the abductions, which is that it's contactees are often like a consensual experience generally happens. They are brought aboard UFOs, they are taken to distant planets, shown different things. They often return because they can't breathe. The air in the atmosphere is just not breathable for them. And the story of Elizabeth Clare is kind of like that, in that she lived in the Drakensberg mountain range, and at the time, this was in 1954, she claimed to see a UFO land nearby, and she claimed to see an individual outside of a porthole window. Now, this individual, he had like long blonde hair, and he had these gray colored eyes. And this initially just terrified Elizabeth Clare. She didn't want anything to do with it. And then eventually this UFO kept coming back. And then she met the man that would come from that UFO. And this man's name was Akon. And like, I almost can't take Akon seriously, because this case is a great example of that song Smack That, just in the area that it goes. So Elizabeth Clare would go on to have sexual relationship with Akon, going so far as to birth a child named Ailing, which was birthed on Akon's home planet of Matan. So she births this child on this planet, and unfortunately she cannot live on Matan. The air is not breathable. She eventually comes back. And I think what's fascinating about this is, again, we're talking about UFOs in South Africa in 1954. Her story first appeared in print in about 1956 in the pages of Flying Saucer Review. And she became like a public darling in Africa for many years. And in fact, she would use her celebrity status to live with people when she did not have any money. And there is going to there's definitely going to be some people that I will talk about that she did kind of take advantage of, that her status afforded her. The second contactee, and honestly, if you want to hear Elizabeth's full story, because I just didn't really want to get into it here because it's very fantastical. There's a great podcast called The Saucer Life. They did a fantastic episode on the story of Elizabeth Clare. The second contactee was a man named Edwin, and Edwin worked in a factory in the town of Durban in South Africa. And his supervisor, which this guy had come on, relatively recently when he started working there, was a man named George, and the two would go on to become very good friends. And they would actually often work on Edwin's motorcycle after work, or they would go fishing together. And then one night when they did go fishing, George took out what looked like a radio receiver, and he started talking to someone on it, making odd commands, having them do odd things. And it was at this point that George turned to Irwin and said that he was an alien, and his name was Valdar, and he had to return to his planet called Koldus. interestingly enough, they kept in contact throughout the years. Edwin claimed to be able to channel Valdar. He would have channeling sessions, and they would keep into contact. So it's nice that people can have these long distance, alien friendships through channeling. It's fantastic. I wish it makes me want to do it in a way. I want to make some alien friends too. So pivoting now to the kind of traditional close encounter of the third kind cases. This one right here, it almost feels like a contactee case in many ways, because when you separate out your traditional kind of CE3 encounters, they're often encountered in a state of fear. Witnesses are often terrified. They're often paralyzed to the spot. They can't move. The story of this man, known only as Henry, and Cynthia Hine kept the identity of a lot of these witnesses a secret, unless they were fully open to it. But Henry, he had moved to the Pearl Valley in near the Groot Drakenstein Mountains of South Africa in the 1950s. He had Henry was British. He worked for the British Rheostatic Company as an engineer, and he had a wife who was Spanish, and they had actually spent the Christmas of 1951 on this farmhouse that had been kind of split up into and subdivided into a bunch of different smaller cottages. It was called the Lillefontaine Farm. And this this couple, they own this, it was kind of like a French car. They didn't get into the details of it, but it had been experiencing trouble. This was shortly after Christmas. And Henry decided that it was at night. It was around 7 o'clock. He decided that he was going to put in some repairs for it because they had to make a trip the next day. And he worked on this vehicle for about 4 hours. And instead of waiting the next morning to drive, and the main problem was the battery, he decided, oh, I'm going to take a quick shower, and then I'm going to head out, drive up the mountain, and give this thing a good charge. So he takes a quick shower, and he hops in his vehicle, and he heads toward the Drakenstein Mountains. There's a road that goes up it. It's kind of a narrow road, but it's one that at the time when this case was investigated in the 80s by Cynthia Hind, it had been investigated previously in the 70s by a Spanish man named J.J. Benitez. By the time that she had investigated this case, this road had become like a heavily traveled road in the area. At the time, it wasn't so much, but even still late at night, it probably wouldn't have gotten many visitors. So he travels up this mountain, and he reaches the top at around 11:15 p.m. And he sat for a while looking down over the plateau, over this rough, rocky area. And as he was on his trip back, he was startled by a man that just stepped out of this dark portion of the mountains and into his headlights. So he stops the car, and this man, he looks to be wearing kind of like a light lab coat, like he's some kind of scientist or something. And he raises his hand up to flag him down, walks over to the driver's side window, and he asks him, "Hey, do you have any water?" And Henry was just kind of caught off guard. He's like, "The only water I have is in the radiator of this vehicle." And this man, who's Henry, it's not really clicking for Henry. This man is shorter. He has like the appearance of a normal human man by and large, but he starts to get visibly upset because he desperately needs water. So Henry, being the good guy that he is, he's like, okay, there's this stream down the way just a little bit. Hop in the vehicle, we'll go get some water. So it's about a third of a mile down this mountain. So the man climbs in the passenger side, and I mean, I think it's cool if an alien dude wants to step in the passenger side of a car, have at it. They take a trip down the road. They go to this spring that crosses over the road, and the only thing that Henry has to collect this water is an old oil can. So they wash it out. They collect some water, and he directs Henry to this uneven ground right off the road. And it's in a darkened part of the mountain. Henry described how the moon was out that night, and it was pretty bright in the area, but there was right next to the mountain there was this darkened area. So he has them drive into this area, and his headlights fall upon what looks like just a smallish, it was about 10 to 15 meters in diameter, or about 32 to 49 feet, just disc on the ground. And it stood about 13 feet above the ground. It was on some feet, and there was a ladder leading up inside it. So this alien being directs Henry to come with him quickly. So they grab the can, and Henry climbs that he counts that it was 8 rungs to get into the vehicle. So they climb up in there, and immediately he's in a circular room, and he describes how there's like this kind of long couch that extends throughout like the entire outer wall. And on the couch, he sees a man on his back. There's a couple other men that are attending to him, and he realizes that something has happened to this man. He's hurt in some way. So this alien being asks him, my friend burned himself. This is what we need the water for. So they bring over the water. They apply it, and despite being, apprehensive at first, like Henry's just kind of like amazed by everything that's going on inside here. So the man, this alien man, is as polite as he can be. He gives him an opportunity to ask questions. And so the first thing that Henry asks him is like, where are you from? And the man simply says, over there. And he asks him again, and he just says, over there. Like, if you're on Earth for a little while and you see what we're capable of on this planet, I understand why you wouldn't want to tell anybody where you're from. But he also asks, because Henry's an engineer, how their ship worked, where was their motor, which the being replied that there was no motor, but they had the ability to nullify gravity and generate a magnetic field, and using this like heavy liquid. And eventually these beings just tell Henry, hey, you got to leave now. You got to get off the ship. So they direct him outside, and Henry just goes on with his life. But it just seems interesting how this incident in many ways was tailored to the eyewitness, in that how he was able to ask these questions and look into this technological craft. And again, it gets into the difference between the ancestral spirits and this technological thing, two very separate things that are going on. And in this section we will also hit upon those of Black African ancestry that do encounter these discs and still think that they are ghosts. So probably one of the other incidents that has kind of a good is a little more well known than the others that I'm talking about is what is known as the Mindalore incident. The main witness is a woman named Megan Kazette, and this incident occurred on January 3rd, 1979. She was up late reading a book, and her 12-year-old son actually walked into the living room and said, I couldn't sleep. So they ended up going into their kitchen to get some water. And that's when their dog just started to go nuts. Their dog's name was Cheeky. And the dog started to, bark excitedly. So she goes outside and she realizes that the dog has busted through the fence and is running down the street. So Megan and her son, Andre, chase after this dog. She's concerned because she doesn't want it to, wake up the neighbors, cause a racket. So she pursues the dog up a couple of streets until they get to this new access road that had been built. And she saw what she believed at first to be an airplane that was coming in. And that statement kind of seems strange because it's like, this is a small residential road. It's not going to be able to land on it. So why is this plane coming down? But it was the color of the light, which she described as pinkish, that kind of threw it off to begin with. And then she saw that the object was egg-shaped. Definitely not a plane. And actually, the bottom of it was pretty flat. It was standing on four legs, encased in this pink light. And there were also two additional lights, one on each end of it, that were projecting onto the ground. And at first she's baffled, like, am I seeing, military technology or something like that? And as she's standing there puzzled with her son, these six men emerge from this craft. And that's an interesting aspect to this case too, is that when describing the occupants of these craft, if they're vague about the descriptions, they will say they look like men. And if they are and even when they're not, they are described as very human-like. And that gets into an interesting aspect about colonization, in that, the interesting parallels between, the white man that comes to these countries and these other men that come down in these UFOs. They're not always seen by folks of Black African ancestry, but they are seen in kind of this universal way. So these six men emerge. They're wearing, four of them are wearing coveralls from head to toe. In fact, their faces are actually covered. And two of them actually, their faces are exposed. And they have darker skin. In fact, they describe them as like suntanned in many ways. They had long black curly hair, and they had black beards. So they started immediately going and picking up grains of sand, and they would watch it slip between their fingers. And then one being, they eventually, split off into these two teams of three. One being would speak in this rather sing-songy voice, while the other one would speak in a monosyllabic tone. It was very strange. And this is not something that's really unusual in UFO cases. There are many people that will report aliens that speak in high sing-songy voices. But it's the interaction here that's truly fascinating, because it seems like they're essentially speaking two different languages at the same time, but yet they're understanding it. So The languages were completely unfamiliar to Megan, but she compared them to something like Mandarin, or Chinese, an Asian kind of language. So these strange men then went to examine the tarmac, and they would press their hands into the surface of the road. And they started to kind of compare the road to the sand. And then they noticed that Megan and Andre were standing there staring at them. So one of the men that, with their face exposed, starts to walk in their direction, and the this man bows to them and starts talking in this monosyllabic tone. They don't understand what he's saying, but Megan describes how his eyes were very enticing and they were very calming. And then about a second later, she gets very apprehensive. She says she feels dread. So she yells to Andre and says, go run to your father, go get him, bring him here, because she was rooted to the spot. She just couldn't move. So after that, the two men that were closest to her exchanged a few words, and then all of a sudden, bam, they were gone. They disappeared. They didn't see them, climb back into their ship or anything. They just suddenly disappeared, as if they could just, appear in the ship at any time. And the difference between that and watching them emerge is interesting. Like, what did you need to emerge from the ship if you could just bam, make yourself come out of the ship or go back into the ship? Very strange. But when they did, she noted how the legs on this craft started to grow in size, and it started to walk around on its own very briefly, kind of like an insect in many ways, is what she described it as. In fact, she thought the legs of this thing were very spider-like, until the object eventually just shot right up into the air and disappeared. Interestingly enough, with this case, there were additional eyewitnesses that would come forward later. A husband and wife living in Mindalore reported seeing this gray cone-shaped craft with 4 legs on the bottom. And at the time when they were able to connect this, that their dog Cheeky started to bark, is when they reported seeing these strange beings that started to show up. So it's kind of interesting how they have this this interesting, kind of corroborated story of a very strange UFO and their human occupants. And again, like, the human occupant, the appearing aspect to these cases is endlessly fascinating. Not all of them are distinctly human looking. The folks in the aerial school landing, they were drawn in a number of different ways, some in which made them look like grays, and others in which kind of made them look more human-like, with large eyes and long black hair. So this idea that these aliens are appearing as human, very human looking, is endlessly fascinating to this different cultural take on this phenomenon. So there's a few shorter CE3 cases that I have here. One of them is the Groendahl Reserve incident, and there were 4 boys: Peter Simpson, Johnny, Hugo Ferreira, and Joe Perino, and they were hiking on this reserve in 1978, and they were actually staying the night there. And Peter Simpson's mom was actually going to pick them up the next day. So on the morning of the next day at around 11:15, these 4 boys see this glistening stone that's about 3,000 feet away from them. And at first, it looked like there were what they described as poachers nearby. So they had walked over to see what was going on, and that's when they noticed that they were covered head to toe in like the what they saw as like kind of like aluminum foil in a way. And there's an interesting similar case to this, and they equated it to like a firefighter suit. There's an interesting similar case from 1973 in Falkville, Alabama, in which a police chief who had been sent out to investigate a UFO ended up seeing this man, and he took a picture of him that was covered head to toe in what it looked like aluminum foil. uh it was later believed that it was a hoax, and that it was a person wearing this type of fire suit, but uh the similarities are interesting. The boys noticed that there was like no sound as these men started to move towards them, and they did end up seeing them, and they were not so much as walking as they were gliding. They didn't appear to be touching the ground at any time. So these two strange figures eventually become three as another one joins up with them. And this third is carrying kind of a smaller suitcase. And this is, again, something we've seen in a lot of other humanoid reports from other countries. In 1977, in there's a series of incidents in West Wales in which there were what they described as these spacemen, some of which would be carrying the suitcase around different properties for different purposes. So it's interesting that you have that here with these group of boys. So these strange men, they approached a fence, and they actually just glided right over this fence before they just followed this hillside and eventually kind of just disappeared. What they found later on, um, in the area where this glinting stone was seen, was that there was an oval depression 23 by 65 feet in the ground, with 9 indentations outside the ground. Just a very interesting CE2 kind of analog to this case. But again, the similarities are interesting, despite the fact that the UFO is not as widely known. Cases are, especially like not very well known cases, are not really known in this country at this time. UFO periodicals didn't make it over there. UFO books, there were no real, they didn't really have television programs devoted to this. They didn't have radio programs much developed to devoted to this until, again, the 1980s. So 3 years prior to the Groendahl Reserve case, a gentleman by the name of Danny Van Gran, he was a resident of Loxton, South Africa, arose early one morning to examine his sheep pens. He was a farmer. And he noticed that parked in his enclosure, like, again, this is incredibly early in the morning, he saw what he believed to be a government geological survey vehicle just parked in his enclosure. No idea how it got in there. But what he believed them to be doing is prospecting for uranium. That seems to be something that, I'm sorry, you might want to discuss with, the person that you're talking to. Hey, we're gonna come and hang out in your sheep pens, and we're gonna look for some uranium. It's fine, don't worry about it too much. But the idea just like isn't totally dawning on him until he walks up and he sees that there's a bunch of figures inside this, and they were definitely not from the Geological Survey. And when the beings inside this craft noticed them, they shot him with a beam of light, and their craft just departed rather quickly. Kind of a dick move, not gonna lie. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time, pal, and you're gonna shoot this guy with a beam of light? Not Very cool. Not cool at all. So to get into a CE5 case involving folks of Black African ancestry, that is very much seen as a ghost case. A gentleman by the name of Solomon Katavu, his brother, and a couple other guys were making their way home to a village near the Huang Game Reserve. This was in 1983, and their bus kind of dropped them off about 3 or 4 kilometers away from their houses, and so they just decided that they would walk home. This was late at night. There were no lights out there, so they were walking along this road next to some dense scrub brush, and they noticed that there was this bright light in the sky, and they kind of stopped to watch it for a second, and then this light descended directly in their direction, and they immediately feared for their lives, assuming that this was some kind of ancestral spirit. So they took cover behind some trees, and this light continued to descend, and it got to about treetop level. And the light, as it came closer, they noticed that it was disc shaped. It belonged to a disc shaped object, and this machine opened up, and there were 2 men that just started to descend, and they described them as men. They started to float down to the ground, and immediately they just made a run for it. They were not sticking around. They ran for home, ran the last few kilometers. But again, it's interesting that even when you have this technological aspect here, they still associate them with ancestral spirits. Like Clifford Buchanan says, hey, times change. So that may in fact be true. So now we're going to get into the CE4 cases, the abduction cases, and the variety of them is kind of fascinating, and you can kind of break them down into 2 different categories. One of them is as dreamlike as anything. And in many cases, abductions have this dreamlike feel to them. Many times when describing them, it feels like it's a singular incident that happened kind of inside their bedroom. There isn't any craft that they're brought on board or anything like that, but the similarities to abductions are there. And then there are the straight up traditional kind of abduction cases. The first case involves a woman named Caroline. She was 21 years old at the time. She lived in the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe, and her first experience occurred again around this time when UFOs are starting to be recognized as UFOs in the country. And her experience occurred on April 1st, 1988. She was lying in bed, just unable to sleep one night. And she kind of had this eerie feeling. And this is a feeling that I've often seen described in many cases in which there's just like a strangeness in the room. And there's also like a silence in the room, as if you've kind of just been cut off from the rest of the world. So she's laying there. She can't even hear the ticking of her alarm clock. So all of a sudden, this bright white light shoots in through her ceiling. And with the appearance of this ball comes this paralysis. She cannot move. And whatever this thing is, it just seems to start to float around the room. It projected beams of light in a horizontal manner, which was instead of like projecting light all over the place, it appeared to be presenting it in a strictly horizontal manner. And she could see this thing moving between her bed and her dressing table and kind of just moving around it. And that's when Caroline looked up to the ceiling and she could see where this light had come from. There was this shaft of light that was going up, and it connected to a UFO that she could see through her roof, above the house. And not only that, she could actually make out the image of some nearby trees uh, adjacent to her property. So she sees uh, this light kind of move around her room for a little while until it just kind of disappears. Um, she lays there in bed for a little bit longer until she just like has to get out of there. She's going to go wake up her mom. When she gets into her hallway, that's when the power cuts out. But she eventually rouses her mom, and they wake up her sisters too, and they go into the living room. And she's just trying to come down from this experience, trying to take it easy, and all of a sudden she feels as if the energy is being drained from her. She feels weak. She also feels kind of weightless. And she's sitting there with her sister, and she asks her sister, "Hey, do you feel this too?" And at first she notices that there's this kind of gray haze between her and her sister. She doesn't know exactly what it is, but kind of like a gray fog. And when her sister would talk to her, one of them sounded like incredibly garbled, almost like when your internet signal kind of like cuts out when you're in a Zoom meeting or something like that. It kind of sounded like that. It was very delayed in many ways. And then when her other sister was trying to talk to her, she just sounded like she was coming from she was hearing her voice from very far off. So later on, her sister confirmed that, yes, I was in fact feeling weightless at the time when you were feeling weightless. And they also claim that her sister, that Caroline, her eyes had grown in size and they were radiating. And that is a bad weekend right there. When your eyes grow and they're radiating, it's just crazy. But Caroline would go on to have kind of a few other experiences like this, not as intense as this, but still equally terrifying. The second case here involves a man named Bruce, and Bruce was a Black Zimbabwean man. And he kind of had similar experiences that Caroline did, definitely defined by paralysis and this feeling of isolation. So about a year after Caroline's experiences, in November of 1989, following a day of work in the fields, Bruce came home and he just kind of went to bed. He was really tired. So he started nearing sleep, but he started to feel strange. He couldn't move his head, hands, legs. He couldn't really move anything, and the air just started to feel really dense around him. He also had this feeling that there was someone in the room with him, and he couldn't see anybody, though. There was this also loud whirring sound, which is, commonly reported in other UFO sightings, especially UFOs, CE1 cases, CE2 cases, hearing this kind of sound of like a motor or something like that. And his first initial thought was, hey, this is a ghost. Despite the fact that he was never able to confirm anything visually, this is a ghost that is affecting me right now. And eventually all of these feelings subsided. They went away, and they started to remind Bruce of these feelings that he had when he was a kid, in that he would often wake up feeling paralyzed. He couldn't remember any of the experiences after that, but they were definitely distinct to that point. There was a follow-up incident in July of 1990 that is just absolutely terrifying. So Bruce woke up feeling ill. His skin felt like it was burning. His throat was sore. His eyes were swollen, and he couldn't actually keep any food down. And he started to remember the night before, slowly but surely. He had woken up and he had seen over in a chair by his door a strange figure sitting there looking at him. And when he looked at it, this figure got up and moved in his direction and came very close to you. It pulled back his hair, and this being said, if you tell anyone about this, I'll kill you. I will finish you off. Which, no, thank you. No. Bruce tried to fight this being off, but was unsuccessful. He described the face of this individual as being very white with non-human features, and like the being in the field that those kids saw, this being seemed to glide instead of walk. What makes this even creepier is that later on, just given the nature of his room, he was able to find some very small footprints that led from the door all the way to the wardrobe, and they just disappeared. Now that's a nightmare I don't want, and I am no thank you. I'm gonna have nightmares about this and not down with it. But Bruce grew up being told that whatever this was, it was actually a Tokoloshi. Now, Tokoloshi is often described as an evil spirit in many ways. Sometimes it's described as a goblin. The guys of the Kryptonaut podcast did a kind of a 2-part episode about the Tokoloshi in these really kind of well-documented cases in which they were kind of messing with like families in southern Africa. I can't exactly remember what country it was, but they kind of have different ways in which they are presented. So yeah, sometimes they're evil spirits out to do you harm. Sometimes they're summoned there by someone who wishes ill will upon you. And at other times they're considered like goblins in many ways. So the last case that I have for you all is it's one of my favorite CE3 cases because the witnesses, they're a mother and daughter team here, and their abductors are kind of overly nice in many ways. They still have a job to do, but just in the way that the dichotomy of the way that the witnesses handled this, which I'll get into shortly. So this goes back to 1988, again, around the time when UFOs are starting to be identified as UFOs and stuff. And these two women, they're a mother and daughter. Phyllis is the mother, and Diane is her 34-year-old daughter. They took part in kind of a typical abduction case. And what's interesting here is that there was no hypnosis required to recall these events. They actually just started to come back to them on their own. So on this particular night, Diane's husband was hard at work putting together a commercial for a company. He had a deadline to hit, so he was pulling an all-nighter, and Diane called her mother to come in and help. So from about midnight to 3:30 a.m., she came in and she helped in every way she could, until eventually she just asked Diane to bring her home. So She agreed, and it was about a 7-minute ride, so it wasn't too incredibly far. So right at the top, as they were going out to their car, Phyllis started to describe the night as being very strange. It was cold out. It was oddly silent. And when she opened the car door, she noticed that there was this bright star in the sky. It was large, though, and it seemed to be throwing off these rays of light, kind of like the star in a Christmas tree, is the way that she described it. And the star seemed to follow them on their short trip. It would move down hills and back up with them, and the sight made Phyllis incredibly nervous. So nervous, in fact, that when she arrived at her house, she asked Diane, "Hey, could you just pull up like a few houses over? I don't want the aliens knowing that I live here." I mean, I think they are know already, but I could be wrong on that. I could be wrong. That's fine. But they put the car in park, and when they did, this light, which started to take on this like elongated shape, was projecting orange lights off of it. And it started to descend, and it came between a pair of trees. And at first, Phyllis described this thing as being squarish, and the way that it just creeped up along the trees, it's kind of terrifying in the way that it does. It's like nobody wants to be stalked by a UFO. Like, just go about your business. We don't need to do this in the creepy banner. But the moment that Diane actually turned off the car, this object shot right directly at them. And at closer range, they noticed that it was donut shaped. AP, if you're watching, man, donuts, dude. We got some donut sightings happening here. But this object kind of turned and flipped over a couple of times. And Phyllis claimed that she could see about 6 to 8 beings on board this thing. And she describes one as having their hand on their hips and a hand on their face, which is an interesting posture. But Diane was so frightened at first, she didn't even want to look at this thing. So she actually just covered her face, and her mother told her that to stop being silly, that you're totally going to miss out on the terrifying UFO people. Diane, come on. But the strange thing about this craft is that underneath it was actually hollow, like a traditional, like this is an actual space donut here. Space donuts. We got them. They could actually look up through the bottom of this craft and actually see the stars above. So kind of like a cut scene. They're in the car at first. They're looking up at this object. Phyllis is seeing all these people on this craft. The next moment, Diane feels herself being led up into this craft, and up into a ramp. So this craft is lowered, come down much lower. And she keeps asking, "Where am I? Am I dreaming?" Because she feels like she's dreaming. And there's a woman that is guiding her. And this woman is very strange. She has no hair. Her skin was finely textured. She had kind of almond-shaped eyes. But she described her as very beautiful. And in fact, she said this multiple times. And she would go on later to say this in like telepathically to this woman, that she was just incredibly beautiful. She was just slightly taller than Diane herself, but her skin was actually darker. She described them as this woman as having like a dark suntan. And I think my favorite detail here is that she was wearing quote an all-in-one tracksuit. So we got some totally 80s get up here. I'm loving it. It was dark blue in color, and later on it would actually change to a lighter blue. So Phyllis, who is being led up the ramp by a man of very similar stature, very similar looks. He is bald. He doesn't have any hair, but this man just has a gentle smile, and Phyllis also describes him as being very beautiful. They just take them by the arms. Phyllis is kind of struggling a little bit. She doesn't want to be going up there, but eventually they are ushered onto this craft, and they are enveloped in this white mist, almost like steam. And Diane recalls being put into this like almost like a trance-like state, being incredibly calm. And that was when the woman approached them and said, "Greetings. I am from the Pleiades, and my name is Malila." And Malila was the communicator. Every bit of communication happened through this figure. She definitely had the appearance of a woman, and we know that because in the description, the one thing that differentiated them is that she had like a small pair of breasts. So we have that going on. And this woman leads Diane and Phyllis to a pair of tables. And they have trouble at first getting up onto these tables, so they have to be helped. But Phyllis is just like, "No, I'm not going up there. I'm not going up there." And the great thing about Phyllis is she tries to escape 3 to 4 times. And every time she does, there is this nice, this man with a smile on his face that just like escorts her back until eventually she's like, "All right, screw it. Let's just get this over with." So at first there was an X-ray like machine in the ceiling that came down and examined them. And Diane could see several figures that were working on panels. Some of them had like clipboards and charts and stuff like that. And eventually this strange woman would start to tell them about the problems that Earth is going to have. She identifies that there's going to be earthquakes and massive waves hitting South Africa. She talks about how there's going to be crisis and wars in the Middle East, and that the AIDS crisis is going to be much worse, and it did go on to be much worse. She made a lot of broad general statements that were kind of true in many ways. Their particular interest in these women was in their RNA and their DNA. So they were here to take a sample of each. So they would actually have them take their tops off, and they would take a sample from underneath their right breast. And Diane was fine with it. She went along with it. Phyllis, again, was a little confrontational about it, and I don't blame her. I wouldn't want to go through that either. But they end up taking DNA and RNA samples, and eventually Malila turns to Diane and says, "What is the medical condition called that you have?" And interestingly enough, Diane noted that when she was 12, she had hemolytic jaundice that they didn't catch until much later. And it had caused her to be drastically underweight at times. And according to her, the condition completely cleared up after this UFO encounter. Interesting. Eventually, once they were all done, they were nice, and Malila and the gentleman that had escorted them into the ship escorted them back to their car, and they went home and went about their business. And slowly over time, they started to remember more and more of their experiences. There was an interesting moment for Phyllis when she was getting ready to crawl into bed. She realized that because she was wearing a tracksuit at the same time, they had put it on backwards. So she had a difficult time getting out of it before she climbed into bed. But this story kind of became really famous in and around Southern Africa. These women made appearances on radio programs and stuff. And with Phyllis, Phyllis is who Elizabeth Clare actually came to live with for a short period of time before she died in 1994. But just an interesting abduction case in it kind of just makes me laugh. Some of these elements just make me laugh, but the interesting cross section between these cases and cases in the United States, cases in England, that despite the fact that a lot of these folks didn't have exposure to UFOs and UFO culture, a lot of their experiences are similar in many ways, and that to me is probably the most fascinating part about these African cases. And that's all I have for you folks. Oh man,
That's all you have. That was a lot, sir.
that was 39 pages of
Oh
material.
my gosh.
That was incredible. Thank you so much.
There's so much imagery in those stories that's going to stick with me. I think the UFO growing legs like a spider and walking around though is really have there been other, I mean, is that like I love this talk because this to me is the antidote for seeing the Tic Tac video 4,000 times.
Yeah.
And but we got a lot of, is that just like you'll have a certain amount of that? We have certain percentage of UFOs are just growing, is it going for a stroll?
No, not like that. A lot of people will report UFOs being on legs, but they'll never report that those legs grow and that these UFOs just start walking around like very briefly. That's a visual I don't ever want to see, because it definitely brings up like War of the Worlds kind of vibes, and in the craft that these aliens had that kind of walked on 3 feet that picked people up. No thank you, because that was the first thing that my mind went to, and no thank you.
Right, you don't want to be extra traumatized. You've already seen a thing that you don't understand, and then it's turning into something else that is even scarier.
Yeah. No thank you. And I think that's what draws me to like UFO cases, is like there's always these peculiar details. There's like 1, 2, 3, or 4 in every case that just kind of like makes it stick out. With the Mandalore incident, it kind of seems like it's your random average UFO sighting, and then no, there's these short kind of little black dudes that come out and they start doing some stuff, and oh yeah, their UFO just can kind of walk on legs. Okay, sure. Like I hadn't programmed my mind to handle something like that yet, but I guess we're here. I guess we'll have to do that.
That one that tripped me up. The one crew of UFO knots wearing jeans. Like I'm used, again, I think, it's like, I like coveralls. Yeah, I'm like, I want a pair of color change coveralls. That would be pretty styling. But it's they're just wearing jeans, and it's like, again, it's a very like, we're trying to fit in. We're just everybody be cool. We have jeans.
Yeah, jeans are cool. People are wearing jeans on this planet, right? Yeah, that's right. Jeans and aluminum foil covered head to toe. Yeah, they're totally wearing that. Mm-hmm.
That's what I love about so many of these like Men in Black, sightings, where it's like it's just wrong. Like it's just out of sync. Like some parallel universe where that makes sense, and they just went to the wrong dimension. It's like, oh, this is not the aluminum foil planet. What do we do?
Yeah.
Imagine that's what it is. It's just we packed wrong. It's like, I thought you said this was the aluminum foil planet. And it's like, no, this is the jeans planet.
This is what I was
going to do.
Right. This is what I was talking about with Jack earlier, right? We assume nefarious, like thought out plans, but some things could just be a mistake. Like these other intelligences don't necessarily have transcendent intelligence,
I think they could learn a lot from Back to the Future too, when Doc Brown just has a case full of money from a bunch of different time periods. Like that's your prep right there. Make sure that you go
Yes.
through and you just look at the fashion from each decade. You got to get it right, because if you're not, then you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. You're not going to be able to do what you want to do, which is apparently kind of just, you know, look at some sand, look at some gravel, and you know, see what's going on there. And like I'm always kind of fascinated by cases in which aliens seem to be interested in like the soil of all places. The Stonehenge incident is one case that comes to mind. In 1975, there was a gentleman who owned a liquor store that was returning home. This was at about 12:30 at night, and he was cutting through North Hudson Park in New Jersey, and he sees this UFO that kind of speeds past him. It was kind of moving parallel with him, and it moves ahead, stops in this field, and these 10 aliens get out, and they just start collecting soil samples. Like, okay, cool. I guess you know, check the soil here, of all places, in this rando park in Jersey. Why not? Seems like a good idea.
I mean, if we do that with like archaeological sites and just in general, what's stopping beings from somewhere else? Like, oh yeah, let's check out this Earth's soil. There might be something here. Why not? Or for like a school project. We don't know.
Could be.
Yeah, like, you know, hey, you got a field trip coming up. You're gonna have to collect some soil samples. We're gonna really need those. So make sure that you do that. Don't be having too much fun. Freak out some old dude if you have to, but get those soil samples.
And bring your tinfoil clothes.
Oh yeah, gotta have those tinfoil clothes. I think they might have been all right if this was the 70s and disco, and maybe they're going into, you know, a club or something like that, and they might have fit in a little bit there. But just kind of in forest reserve. No, you stick out like a sore thumb. I'm sorry.
But it's funny. Okay, so like we have this idea that if you wear like a tinfoil hat, it protects you from whatever. So maybe they're like, this will protect us from whatever the humans have, right? We'll just coat ourselves in tinfoil.
You know, that's the hope, that they can't read my thoughts if I have this. But you know, I think you can need something a little heavier duty. You know, for Superman it was lead, so if you got some lead, you might be all right. But right. I don't know how much that tinfoil is going to help you out.
It's just protect your, you know, or you could be naturally protected like I am and just have an empty head most of the time. Like,
I try to be that person. Yeah.
I think anxiety is its own ward, by the way, against things. It's just an energetic field.
Yes.
You're not getting
can't
through
get
that.
through.
You're not locking in on anything. But you have, I like though that you did have like the groups that were like, we're just really interested in the most simple. We're just in, you know, the ground, and then it's like, we're gonna do some uranium mining here, bud. Like, just
it's
like
the
that
thoughts. It's the thoughts that people have when they think something is happening. Like the first rational thought that they go to, most of the time they're mundane, or something like, you know, oh, this is probably so and so just doing something over here. But why do you think the Geological Survey is in your sheep pen mining uranium? Like, where is the thought process that occurs there, other than like, I have nothing else that I can go to? And like, there are interesting similarities between that case, the Tuscumbia space penguins, because these aliens, their craft was shaped kind of like a mushroom, landed in a nearby pen. I don't know if it was like sheep or cows or something, but they get out. They're wearing these like green suits from head to toe. They've got kind of these like black eyes. They weren't sure if they were goggles or something. Just kind of doing what they were doing on their farm. They see the witness comes forward, and I think he had a gun with him at the time. He was about ready to chase him off. He's like, no, paralysis. We're out of here. Let's get out of here. It's just like everything is just a random chance. Oh, you're in the right place at the wrong time, essentially. So yeah, we got to get out of here.
Well, some of that too. It almost struck me. I humorously thought it was an excuse where it's like, you guys taking my sheep, and they're like, no, we're getting uranium, zap him. Just right. You know, it's really it's like one of those flimsy like excuses that like children give you. Just like, yeah, we're just like, no, we were taking a sheep.
Right.
I don't know why you think that. We're here for mining uranium, zap him. No, it's just
like the zapping thing is a problem for me because it occurs time and time again. Like poor Maurice Massey, this French farmer who has a lilac field, and it's absolutely it's not the most beautiful lilac field from what I can tell, because it's kind of sparse in areas. It's almost like if a lilac field had bald patches. That's what it looked like. But like these aliens landed in his lilac field, and he goes over and he's like, hey, what the hell are you doing? And they shoot him with a beam of light. And actually the very first humanoid sighting occurred in Italy not long after the Kenneth Arnold incident. And there's this painter, he's out like kind of painting scenery, I think, and these aliens just land nearby. And like UFOs are a relatively new thing in 1947 at this time, and I don't even know if word has gotten to Italy. I don't know what their sightings were like at that time, but these two very short humanoid beings, they had like green skin and very strange yellow eyes. They get out and they start like looking around in the area, and this painter who's just trying to be nice like waves at him. They shoot him with a beam of light, and then they steal his easel. Like, what kind of dick move is that?
They're just as trigger happy as we are. That's really depressing.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Just like just any excuse to zap somebody with a beam of light.
I mean, if I could zap people with a beam of light and paralyze them, I'd probably be doing it all the time, to be fair.
There's like this kind of theory that I've talked to certain people about with the way that UFOs present lights, use light to their advantage, and in a way it seems as if they have the ability to almost draw the soul out of the body, or to severely like to cause someone to black out just by hitting with a beam of light. And it's just like, no, how about we get that technology? I don't really care about the UFOs. Give me that light technology. I'm here for it, because if somebody's approaching me on the street, guess what? They're going to be unconscious for a little while. I don't want to deal with that. You're not going to be robbing me. Bam, you're done. And I don't have to use a gun. That's fine.
Right. And then they have lost time and that memory for like, or the lack of memory, I guess, forever.
Yeah. Go see if somebody will do hypnosis, I guess. I don't know.
Right.
Who's this weird guy hitting me with some weird beam of light?
Oh my gosh. We I want to open it up. Questions from the chat. Do we have anything? If there were, I might have missed them in back scroll because I was just engrossed in all of the stories. But I'm going to give you folks a few if you want to get a question in front of Rob here. But yeah, just I really love the wild, varied details in that stuff. It's just so interesting that it like deviates. You know, I know we were talking about Whitley Strieber at the beginning. And it just kind of deviates. Like I feel like that became like a model for things. And I remember reading Communion and reading some of the other stuff that came out at the time, and it was just like, that's what happens. The Greys get you, and it's the same.
Yeah, there's a great kind of graph that Joe Nickel had created that shows different types of alien encounters from the 1940s up until the 1990s. And when you look at it, from a linear perspective, all the aliens look weird, very strange, very different up until 1987 when they all start to look like grays. And that's not to say that there weren't gray type beings seen. Maurice Massey essentially described the beings that shot him with a beam of light as being like grays. And Betty Andreessen, whose abductions started in 1967, she described the aliens as being very of a gray archetype. But now, yeah, they're all like grays, or they're all Nordic beings, which gets into a whole other level of racism that I don't want to get into, because it's just get your Aryan beings out of my face. I don't want them. You've got your reptilians, which gets into a whole nother level of racism. And there were a few stories that I didn't want to talk about. One of them is Credo Mutwa, who is a very problematic individual. He is a member of the Zulu tribe, and his experiences are with reptilians, and he has been this kind of poster child in the 90s for David Icke and his problematic theories on, the elite being reptilians. You know what the most baffling thing to me about David Icke and his bullshit back in the 90s? He starts pointing to all these political leaders as being, oh, they're shape-shifting reptilians. And then he puts Chris Christopherson on the list. And that is a shot that is fired over my bow, sir, and I am not happy about it.
I would
Why
not
Chris
tolerate
Christopherson? Why?
I would not tolerate that. That's a line in the sand. This aggression will not stand. We do have a question from the audience. How common is it for investigators to do the follow-up, like in the 20-year frame? I know you mentioned the one investigator who built those relationships, but is that common or uncommon practice?
Today, it's very uncommon because your main investigators are people with MUFON. And just given the short amount of time I spent in MUFON being on their internal review board, what you find is that most often than not, they will have less than 1 hour of communication with the witness, if they are even able to get them on a phone and talk to them. There is generally no follow-up. They make an assessment, they put that determination on that case, and it sits in a bin. And there are a lot of fascinating cases, even from the small amount that I looked at there, that you could have gone into. There was one case from Georgia in which this witness and a bunch of other witnesses saw this UFO land in this field. They saw these humanoids. These humanoids basically said, "Get back in your car. We're not doing anything here." Watched them for a while, and their craft disappeared. They never did any follow-up. They never looked for additional witnesses, and that's kind of the face of it. Back in the day, with people like, J. Allen Hynek, John Keel, Jerome Clark, the original investigators carried on relationships for years. John Keel talked about for a number of years keeping in contact with a number of the witnesses that he talked to, just in case new details emerged or new sightings happened, or just to kind of draw out additional memories. So that used to be kind of the standard of the day. It's not anymore.
Seems like a loss that changed that way of doing things.
It was a passion for a lot of people back in the day. For Keel, it made him some money. It kept him afloat because he would publish in, all sorts of periodicals, Fate magazine, for instance, and stuff like that. You don't really have that as much anymore, so there isn't as much of a way to make money off of it. So you don't have that devoted, as much of that devoted investigators out there. There are a few of them, though. Like John Tenney is one of the most devoted investigators I've ever seen. Like in the strange, you can't even call them humanoid sightings, the stuff that he's been investigating for the last couple of years in and around Michigan, of these strange, like, fuzzy triangles and stuff that moved around on their own. Like, he went and knocked on doors. He talked to people. He kept at it, and you know, there are some good investigators like that that do, and you see that occasionally, but you don't see it enough.
Yeah.
I'm checking the chat.
I just have to
Just
say,
a lot
we
of positive
started with
comments.
donuts and we ended with donuts. Space donuts. We had donut holes this morning.
Right?
It made me laugh hysterically.
I mean, my like one of my theories is that UFOs are a manifestation of our desire for breakfast foods. There's too many instances in which you got your donuts, you got these flat discs that look like pancakes. You got your Joe Simontons, who's and you could make an argument that those were not pancakes; they were more like cookies. They kind of look like cookies, but okay, I'll give you that. You got your egg-shaped crafts. Yeah, I mean, get yourself some bacon looking things and we're good to go, I guess. Like, let's get this theory some legs here. It's breakfast foods.
That just really deeply resonated for me, because my appetite for carbs is just incredible. Yeah, right on.
I think we're blowing it wide open. These UFOs are a manifestation for our desire for carbs. It's just the way that it has to be. Absolutely.
I think between this and ghost farts, today we really just kind of solved a lot of the persistent issues of the paranormal.
Oh yeah.
Mystery solved. Done.
Our job is done.
Yeah. We've solved this thing. There's no need for anybody to do anything further. I'll shut the lights out on the way out.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, if you change your mind, you better plug your stuff.
Oh,
before...
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do the Our Strange Skies podcast. I'm actually involved in a lot of things. If you enjoy role-playing games, I'm involved in 2 podcasts there, The Order of Podcasters and Rolling Through the Realms. Go check those out. I very slowly put out episodes of Our Strange Skies. What I can promise you is that in the next couple of weeks, because I didn't talk about the Ariel school landing, because it's just a lot of it's sifting through the testimony, the varied testimony of a lot of children and trying to piece together one very cohesive narrative. I will be releasing an episode about that, I would say within the next 2 to 3 weeks. I've already started to do a lot of research into that, and slowly over time you'll get more episodes of Our Strange Skies. I think I've filled my quota for UFO stuff for the rest of the year with this presentation, because just like a lot of UFOs here. But if you definitely want to check out what I do, you can follow me on Twitter at your UFO guy, spelled YER UFO guy, and there's links to everything there in my profile.
And if you, like me, will wake up tomorrow morning and just be like, what'd he say? His links are on our website with all the speakers. So I think we're close to wrapping it up. I want to say thank you so much for coming on and just giving like another... you just had incredible presentation after incredible presentation, and this was like just... I'm going to be thinking about, like I said, I'm going to be thinking about a lot of the imagery from these cases for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for asking me to do this. It was a blast. It was a blast to produce 39 pages worth of material.
Research.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And I want to tell people out there in YouTube land before we log off, tomorrow is the 3rd and final day, and shorter but just as strong. We're having our divination panel at noon Eastern Standard. Vanessa, who is on the divination panel?
So Isabella Rotman, who designed the This Might Hurt tarot deck. She's a friend of mine. She's an incredible artist. She does a lot of art and advocacy around sex education. And then Cassandra Snow. They have written 2 books, Queering the Tarot and Queering Your Craft. So I feel like a lot of the discussion is going to be about opening up the tarot for more diverse audiences, as opposed to keeping it kind of a white hetero deck that most people are familiar with. Izzy's deck is incredibly diverse in its imagery and the people who are in it. So I'm very excited to be talking to the two of them tomorrow.
And then following that, last but certainly not least, the legendary AP Strange will be giving us his Bug-Eyed Monsters and UFOs presentation that somebody designed a really nice poster for. And I am really, really excited about that. That is going to be a phenomenal end to a phenomenal weekend. And I just want to thank everybody that came in and out today, the people that stuck with us. Yeah. I'm sort of, you can see I'm losing, right? It's this kind of, the end of this.
Right. You know, our hearts are full, but our brains are nearing empty.
Yep.
Or just overwhelmed from all of the incredible information every single speaker and presenter just had. Again, really well researched and thoughtful approaches to this work. We just appreciate it so much.
Yeah, so go check out their links on the page, on our webpage, and check out the yeah. I know we're all just
I got it. Right.
Do some charities.
Exactly. Buy things from all of the speakers. They deserve your support. Again, if you have a couple pennies to throw in the tip jar, please do. All of that money is going to the speakers. We have a merch store right now. Again, money from that is going to be paying for this and also going to charity. So I'm just very excited by all of this.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with that, good night, weirdos.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Okay, Rob. We're good, buddy.
That was so good.
Thank you so
Rob,
much.
thank you
so much. What a great way to wrap up this day.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that was great. Thank you all again. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
You too, sir. You too.